let's talk about what I read in September. So I had three kind of challenges for myself this month. I had the prompts for the Magical Readathon, the prompts for Becca's Bookoplathon, as well as my Plinko prompts. So there was a lot of reading, especially considering I didn't get started until the second week of September, but I think I actually did pretty well. I'm not going to list which prompts are for which books or anything, because if you wanted to know that, you could go watch my Plinko. So I'm just going to list how many I actually finished. For Plinko, I had 5 prompts. I finished 3 of the books. I'm currently still reading one of the books, and then one of them I just didn't even pick up. For Becca's Bookoplathon, I had 7 prompts. I finished 5 of the books, and I'm currently still reading one of them, and one of them I didn't even pick up. For the Magical Readathon, it's a bit more complicated. There were 7 prompts that had to be done in the month of September, and then there are 3 other prompts that you can do anytime between September and April. You also technically only needed to finish 2 of them to complete the readathon, so there's that. So I know no matter what, I definitely completed the readathon, but I still decided to pick a choice for every prompt anyways. Out of the 7 prompts that were given for September, I finished 6 of them, and one of them I didn't even pick up. And then for the 3 prompts that you can finish between September and April, I didn't finish any of them, so those ones will be finished before April. Now let's talk about the stuff I read. So I have a vlog going up before this video that will be the BookTube Made Me Buy It, episode 2. This one I focus on Becca from Becca and the books. Now in this series, I read 5 books that booktuber kind of forced me to pick up. Not actually, they just forced me by talking so enthusiastically about them in their own videos. If you watch that video, you'll have already heard me talk about these, but I just want to touch upon them quickly here. The first book was Nevermoor, The Trials of Morgan Crow by Jessica Townsend. This is a middle grade magic series about a girl who ends up being swept away from her current life to this magical school. This book is very beloved on BookTube, and I was no different. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. I didn't think I was gonna like middle grade, and this series totally proved me wrong. It's the reason I picked up the Keeper of the Lost City series, and I'm currently loving that as well, though this one is still my favorite middle grade I think I've ever read. The second book I picked up for that video was Rhapsodic by Thalassa. This is about a girl who makes a deal with this kind of Dark Lord Fae King. She's been making deals with him for a very long time, and now she finally has to pay. I thought I was really gonna like this. The first half I enjoyed. I was hoping that the way she was gonna pay him back was sex, because of course I was. The more smut in an erotica novel, the better. This one just kind of let me down because it really went in the cheesy love direction, and that's not my thing. I very much like the dark in dark romance. And this one just didn't really have it for me. I'm also not really a paranormal girl, and so the paranormal aspects of this just didn't do it for me. And I can see why a lot of people love this. If you love paranormal stuff and you really like the romance of a romance book, then this will be for you. But it was definitely not for me, and I gave that 2 out of 5 stars. The third book I picked up was Aurora Rising by Kristoff and Amie Kaufman. And it's about a ragtag group of kids who go on this quest in the galaxy to, I don't know, save the world or something. I thought this was fine. I give this 2.5 stars. I really didn't like the Illuminae files, and this I actually liked a tiny bit better than that series, but still not enough for me to pick up the second book. I find Kristoff and Amie Kaufman's writing very generic, very cliche, and very tween, and I just don't particularly love it. The fourth book I picked up for that vlog was The Furies by Lowe. This is about the new girl at school who gets swept into this kind of cult-like witch group of friends at her dark academia boarding school. I really ended up enjoying this. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The vibes alone are great, but I definitely think there are things that could have been worked on. I think that if the author had worked more on the girls' friendships and connections to one another, really developed their characters more, I feel like this would have hit in a totally different way. I do believe this is a debut book though, and so I'm really interested to read more of Katie Lowe's work. I really didn't like the ending of this book because it just didn't make any practical sense in what happened, but regardless, overall, I really enjoyed the messages of the book. I think they handled some tough discussions. Really well. And the last book I read was Beckoning Shadow by Katharyn Blair. This was a YA novel about this girl who has superpowers, and decides to join this underground fight club so that she can change something in her past. This was pretty enjoyable. I don't read a lot of YA anymore, but I enjoyed this for what it was. I enjoyed the main character, I enjoyed some of the other characters surrounding her, and I love a good fight club type of story. Like, I think that's just really fun. Any competition story is really fun, and you know, the training montage and all that, I enjoy. I would definitely suggest this over something like J. Kristoff and Amie Kaufman, which I feel like is so much more hyped, and I actually feel like this was better. I thought all the different superpowers and stuff were really cool and interesting. I feel like this was kind of a different take on those. And what I liked most of all was that there were no easy answers in this series, which I can sometimes appreciate because in YA, too often things are kind of wrapped up in a neat little bow much too easily in a way that isn't exactly nuanced, and I feel like this kind of was. So I gave this probably 3.5 stars because I'm just not a YA reader, but I think a lot of people could really, really like this. Lip gloss and cat hair do not go together. Now, getting into my September reads, the first thing I finished was Everblaze by Shannon Messenger. This is book 3 in the Keeper of the Lost Cities series. I don't want to say a lot about it because obviously this is a sequel, so I don't want to ruin anything for anyone, but I continue to enjoy this series. I always say that. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I love these characters. I'm really interested to see where the next book goes because because of what happened in these last couple of books, the characters are being removed from the location we've seen them in this whole time, and I think that might be really interesting. I love that Sophie and Keith had to team up a lot more in this book because he's probably one of my favorite characters, and so I enjoy getting to see them work together so much. I also love that we got to see a little bit more of his backstory and his home life in this one. I feel like we got introduced to some characters that I find really intriguing and I would like to know more of, so that's always exciting. This is really a comfort series for me at this point. The next book I finished was Red Rising by Pierce Brown. This one took me on a roller coaster because I really did not like this book at the beginning, but I really kind of loved it by the end. This book actually takes place on Mars. The main character is a miner and he's having to mine different things to kind of try and get the world going. They're trying to terraform Mars and they need these miners to keep doing what they're doing to the best of their ability to get Mars terraformed. But of course they're living in squalor, their lives are really hard, etc, etc. This really takes up the first third of the book. A lot of different things happen to the main character that kind of spur him on this quest of rebellion because of course the life he's living is not quite what it seems. I really didn't enjoy the first third of this book. I was getting really freaking frustrated because a lot of things happened in ways that I kind of hated. A female character was killed off to spur the action forward, to force the main character onto his journey, and that always kind of annoys me. Female characters should not just be there for the sake of the hero's quest. And I feel like the author was very aware that he did that, and yet he did it anyways, which was a bizarre choice. So I almost DNF'd at this point. But after this point, once he goes on his quest, he ends up in this competition war simulation, and I loved it. It was so fucking dark. Like, darker than the Hunger Games, in my opinion. I looked it up like several times throughout the book going, are we sure this is a YA novel? But it is, and yeah, I kind of loved it. That section of the book was really well done. I just kind of love the exploration of what people will do when they're in power, what people will do to survive. I gave that 4 out of 5 stars. Like I said, didn't like the first half of the book but that second half was damn good. So the first thing I read was Swing Volume 2. This is about a couple who decide to become swingers and open up their sex life with other people because they feel like they're in a rut. I enjoyed this series. I don't have a lot to say on it, but I think it's a really interesting situation. I'm always interested in people's realistic sex journeys. I believe that this is actually based on the creator's own experiences with his wife. I believe they both write part of this series, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought this was a very honest look at this type of situation. And then I picked up the manga My Hero Academia Volume 1, and I fell fucking in love with this. I have actually now read volumes 1 through 9, I believe, because I just adored this so much instantly. This is a manga about a kid who exists in a world where most people have quirks, which is basically just some sort of very specific superhero ability. Our main character in the series was born quirkless, but despite this, he has vowed to study his ass off in order to make it into the UA Academy, which is the school where all the awesome quirked people go, because that's where they like train to be the best superheroes in the business. Nobody has ever made it without a quirk into this academy, so obviously he's in for a ride. That is until he ends up crossing paths with All Might, who is the #1 most badass superhero in the world. All Might sees something in him and decides that he's going to help him, and from there the journey begins. I just really love this. It's just really fun and easy. I put it up there with Keeper of the Lost Cities in the fact that it is very much a comfort read for me right now. I downloaded the Shonen Jump app, which is yet another subscription service, but I think you pay like $2 or $3 a month and you get access to a ton of different series. So that's how I've been reading all mine. It's so much cheaper than buying them individually, so I definitely suggest that. Overall, I would give that series about 4 stars. I don't really rate them individually because they all are kind of blurring together since I'm consuming them so quickly. While we're talking about comic books, I finished Birthright Volume 10. I just really didn't like the series overall. It's one of those things that like once you get far enough into a series of comics, you kind of just say, well, like, I might as well finish it. And that's what I did here. I really like the writer of these comics because he wrote Nailbiter and I adored that series, but Birthright did not do it for me. I just felt like every single character flip-flopped on their choices throughout the entire series. It really wasn't enjoyable for me. This was about a boy who kind of finding a portal almost and going off into this crazy fantasy world, and he has to defeat the evil Lord Lowe, and then he comes back into the real world where his whole family has been missing him and only a year has gone by for them, but in this fantasy realm like 35 years have gone by. It's a whole thing. I love that premise, but this whole series was like a 2-star. It was not good. And this final volume was no different. I actually gave the final volume 1.5 stars because that's how much I hated it. A book I wanted to talk about that I actually read back in August and forgot to include it in my August wrap-up was The Box in the Woods by Maureen Johnson. This is book number 4, but it actually can be read as a standalone in the Truly Devious series. Now this takes place over summer break. It follows our main character Stevie Bell as she gets hired to figure out this old mystery at this summer camp. I adore the Truly Devious series and I adored this novel as well. I really enjoy Stevie as a character. I really enjoy the side characters a lot. I wish we got a little deeper into Nate and Janelle because I just like want to know them so much more than I currently do. Now what I will say about this one is it has quite an ending and I was fine with it, but I'm pretty sure a lot of people are going to hate it. It's something that you will never see coming because it has nothing to do with the book you just read. Like the ending truly comes out of absolutely nowhere. There is one clue in the entire book that is actually connected to the ending, and I remember reading it and actually thinking something similar to the ending, and then I was like, no, that doesn't make any sense because that would be crazy. But Maureen Johnson went there, and you know what? I was cool with it. I rated this 4 stars. I'm always down for an ending that makes 0 sense. And I thought it was a fun one, but yeah, I definitely don't think a lot of people are gonna love it. The next thing I read was Confessions by Kanae Minato. So I was actually going to physically read this, but then once I started reading it, I realized that the book is very much a monologue. It is one character speaking, telling their story, basically. Now there's actually 4 different parts throughout this book, so there are different characters that speak, but it's still always in monologue format, speaking to you. And so I ended up listening to this on audiobook, which I think was the perfect decision. That's just such a good way to intake this. This was about a teacher who believes that her students murdered her daughter. So she decides to get some revenge, which sets off kind of a string of repercussions. I really enjoyed this. I love a good revenge tale, a good retribution tale, and I kind of love it even more when you're seeing the consequences of those actions. Violence begets violence, you know, that sort of thing. I just love that so much. I've actually read another book that this reminds me of, and I really want to do like one of those like, if you like this, read this videos, but like, I'm terrible about writing them down. I think that this book is a lot of fun just on a surface level, but I also think it has a lot to say about the way we stigmatize people. the way we stigmatize people who have conditions or diseases, the way we stigmatize people who are from a different class background, the way we stigmatize people with a different IQ or who behave different from us emotionally. I really just enjoyed this. Anyone who has a dark soul, you will love this. I gave this 3.5 stars out of 5. I totally want to read more from this author because this was really fun. I shouldn't say fun, it's really dark, but you know. Honestly, I should bump it up to a 4 because it was really good. The next thing I read was Wylding Hall by Elizabeth Hand. This was another one that I was going to read physically, and then I realized it would just be better as an audiobook. This one is done in the same format as Daisy Jones and the Six, where it's a musical band telling you their story. So this also had more than one narrator, so it was very easy and fun to listen to on audiobook. This is a horror novel of sorts. It's a very light horror. This was about a fictional band who once created this widely popular masterpiece of an album at this place called Wylding Hall. They spent the week there writing music, hanging out, partying, performing at the local pubs. They recorded some of this music, and when the weekend ends, one of their bandmates goes missing. The story is being told from several years later while the bandmates are trying to figure out what happened on that weekend. Now this wasn't anything to write home about, really. I thought that this was fine. If you're more scared of horror but you want to read something to get you in the spooky mood, I think this is a good one. It's very easy to digest because of how good the audiobook is and the way it's narrated with a full cast, but it's definitely nothing that's going to scare you. There were definitely some parts that were creeping in with this creepy atmosphere. There were just like tiny little moments here or there. It's just that overall it didn't really do it for me, and I listened to this like at night while I was alone and it still didn't really do it for me. I don't feel like we really got to know the characters that well. It is a very short book. There is some stuff about local folklore that I really enjoyed, and I wish more of that had been explored. The person who goes missing is very interested in black magic, so there is a little bit of that thrown in there as well, and I love the idea. I just wish it had been explored more. I ended up giving this 2.5 out of 5 stars. It's not horrible, but I have a feeling I'm gonna have a hard time remembering it a couple months from now. The next book I read was Golden Sun by Pierce Brown. Apparently I loved the first book so much that I had to immediately get the second book. Now this book I did not like as much as the first one. I actually almost DNF'd it as well, and then some things started happening and I kept on. This book takes place a couple years after the events of Red Rising, which really threw me off, the fact that there was this massive time jump. I mean, it was only a couple years, but it still seemed very bizarre. Now, I really enjoyed the second half of the book, again, more than the first, just like the first book, and I've realized that the reason for that is my favorite character is Severo and the Howlers. Those are the characters I adore, and the minute those characters showed up in the book, I was all in. I love that the writer is not afraid to kill off characters and go really dark, because I love a series that has lasting effects and consequences, and this series really does. Like, they kill off all your faves. Like, they are just killing people off left and right. And, you know, I think that makes it more emotionally impactful. I am going to continue on the series. I gave this one probably 3.5 out of 5 stars. I feel like there are a lot of like ballsy choices made. I love that you never know what's gonna happen. I also really liked what this book had to say about our main character, Darrow. There was a part in the book, I don't remember what it was word for word, but where they talked about how the reason he does so well as a leader, the reason he kind of wins so often against all of his enemies, is because they just can't match his madness. And I feel like that really is true. Like, he's the type of character who just goes like head first in and just does whatever comes to his mind, and he's really smart, but not strategically smart. He's just willing to take the risks that no one else is. I also love that he's a character that is so incredibly violent, but who also like has a really pure heart, who deeply cares about the people he loves. It makes him interesting and complicated. He's not a golden boy. He's not perfect and good in every way that so often main character and heroes are. He's a lot more complex than that, and I think that was really well done. The next thing I read was Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. The language they use to talk about people of lower intelligence is not the same language we would use today. It is pretty vulgar by today's standards, and so I definitely think you should be aware of that if you're gonna read this, because obviously it comes up pretty often in the book. This is about a main character who goes through this experiment to improve his intelligence. It is done on a mouse first named Algernon, and so they believe they're ready for human trials. And our main character is the only person chosen for this human experiment. The book follows him as his intelligence grows. He is writing down these diary entries so that they can have this like historical proof for their experiments and all that, as well as going to therapy lessons, or as well as going to therapy sessions to explain his emotions and what's happening. And so we're reading along as those things happen, as well as following the consequences when things start to go awry. I really like this. I didn't think I was going to because I have such a chip on my shoulder about reading classics. I don't have a lot to say about it because I do feel like the book is pretty blunt in what it's having to say. Like, I don't think you really have to read between the lines here. I think the book has a lot to say about, obviously, the way we view intelligence, the way people's worth tends to come down to that, the way we can often feel superior to people who we decide we can look down on, and how that opinion can change when they are no longer your fucking rug to step on. But I also believe that there's a lot to say here about, you know, ignorance is bliss or whatever. Is it better to be blissfully unaware and happy, or would you rather see things as they are, grime and all, but be lonely and miserable? I enjoyed this book overall and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. There's also some hardcore manic pixie dream girling in this, so that's always fun. Next thing I read was The Last Graduate by Naomi Novik. This is a sequel in her Scholomance series. I listened to the audiobook for the first one last month, I think, or maybe it was the month before. I absolutely adored it, and so I pre-ordered the audiobook to the sequel, which is something I have never done in my life, and I immediately listened to it as soon as I got it, and I was literally finished before the end of the month, even though it came out on the 28th. It was so good. Not as good as the first book, but still just, I loved it. It's about a girl who goes to this magical school that's trying to kill her, as well as everyone else in the school. Basically, you're on guard every day, all day, because the school is constantly throwing these monsters at you to try and kill you, and all you have to do to graduate is basically get through it alive. It's also seen as a good thing to try and make alliances because you can't watch your back 24/7, and so you need to make alliances for people who will do it for you. I definitely think that the audiobook is the way to go with this series. There is so much explaining involved, just constant exposition that really breaks up the flow of the story, and so I feel like reading this physically would be horrendous. Like, it would just not be a fun experience. But the audiobook is fantastic. Like, I adore it. I think the narrator does such a good job. She has such a perfect, like, pithy essence to her voice, which just like matches the main character so well. Our main character is not well liked at her school because she is not exactly pleasant. No matter what you ask her or how you ask it, she will have some sort of cutting remark to throw back at you, and I just adore every part of her. Her interactions with the love interest are fantastic. She just constantly kicks him and he is just completely unaware of it. He has no problem with it whatsoever, and I don't know, I love them so much. There was a part of this book near the end that I got completely lost and didn't know what they were talking about or what they were doing, and so there was about 10% there that I was not enjoying so much, because sometimes the book does get overly confusing if you're not paying attention. I gave this one 3.5 out of 5 stars. And the last thing I read this month was The Atlas 6 by Olivie Blake. Now, this book has absolutely blown up on Book Talk and BookTube, so I feel like most people know what it's about, but basically it's a dark academia sort of magic library that the main 6 characters have to protect. They've all been invited to this magical library, and their job is to get through this kind of trial period so that they can become one of the 5 who protect this library for the next however many years, because if they get through that, they will be given all the resources they can imagine. I loved and hated this book in equal measure. It was truly a roller coaster. I almost DNF'd it at one point, but the second half of the book really fucking did it for me. Getting to watch them interact with Atlas and get their invitation and all that, I thought their introductions were all perfect. I was immediately interested in every single character. Unfortunately, once they got to the school, my interest really waned. And mostly it's because I found every character so insufferable. Like, just, there was a good chunk of the book, right from the like 20% mark to the 50% mark, where I just hated everyone because they were all so annoying in their own ways. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they were all very solitary. They weren't interacting a lot with each other. They were all kind of focused on their own things, on their own research. So all I could focus on was their internal dialogue and the things they were thinking about, and unfortunately I didn't find any of them interesting in that respect, except for maybe Parisa, and I think that's because she's the only one who was interacting a little bit more with other people. But in the second half of the book, that's where the groove really hit for me, and that might be because of the introduction of sex scenes. That will always do it for me. I fell in love with these characters once they started interacting with each other. They all have such complex and juicy dynamics. I just want to explore more and more of their interactions. They were so good. I will say they do have the type of interactions where you're like, nobody talks like this, because it's all just a little too eloquent. It's all just a little too darkly beautiful, every line that comes out of their mouth, but like, I'm obsessed with it. I'm a sucker for it. What can I say? I love how with each of the characters, they all have tension with each other, whether it's sexual tension or just actual hateful tension, but I feel like that leads to so many opportunities because things could really go in so many different directions, and I love that. Then there was the ending, which had like some reveals that I didn't quite love, only because they didn't feel quite true to character. I did find some of it surprising, which was great, amazing. I love when I don't see things coming. There were two characters involved in this situation, and one of the characters kept saying that he wanted to be more involved in what was happening, but then like when the other character would mention the most obvious way to be involved, he was like, no, not like that. It just didn't make a lot of sense. I know that's stupid, but it's a very nitpicky thing that was really getting to me. Anyways, I gave this book 3.5 stars because, like I said, that middle portion really wasn't for me, but I'm really freaking excited to see where the story goes next because I love watching these characters interact. Another thing I read was Caught by Harlan Coben. This was about a woman who used to run a talk show similar to Catch a Predator. She catches this one guy who claims he's innocent, like all of them do. He's eventually found not guilty and ends up being murdered. Now she's on the hunt to find out if he truly was guilty or not, because she wants to make sure that she didn't get an innocent man killed. This book was really interesting because I actually feel like this is a solid thriller. I enjoyed all the twists and turns. I thought that they were really well done in a way where they weren't fully telegraphed, but there were some clues, like they weren't out of nowhere. I really like the main character. I feel like she's a character I would follow on to other books. But the problem with it was I just found it really forgettable. Like every time I would put the book down, I would simply forget that I was reading it. There was also a really big tonal shift in some parts. There was this really silly group of men who are all having midlife crises that she kept going to get help on this investigation, and anytime she would go to that group, it just felt like it was from a completely different silly book, like more like something from a Jana Ivanovich novel than from a Harlan Coben novel. It was very weird. But I really liked the ending. I liked a lot of what it was doing. I think it's a really decent one, so I gave it 3.5 stars. So those are all the things I read in September. I think I did a decent job of getting so much read since I was only really reading for 3 weeks. I hope you liked this video, and I hope you come back in soon. Bye.